15 seconds, okay? Your 15 seconds. All right, I'm going to call the City Council study session to order for July 29th, 2019. Roll call, please.
Mayor Les.
Here.
Councilor Baker.
Here.
Councilor Westover.
Here.
Councilor Crawford.
Here.
Councilor Warren.
Here.
Councilor Vermillion.
Here.
Councilor Snyder.
Present. Okay, great. So we're going to have a fairly informal work session here. There's going to be no decisions made, but we're going to collect, I think, some valuable information tonight from some people in the audience and also from Evan, Josh. So staff, do you want me to turn over to Evan for a little bit and
Yeah, that'd be
take
great.
it from here for the economic element?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming on what should have been your free Monday evening.
All right.
So, yes, this is a discussion session. We are not asking for a formal motion, but we are, of course, asking for input and discussion. We have what is a mostly complete economic element that will be in front of you for adoption very soon.
Next meeting, right?
Yes. And we have received input from our representative from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who is in the audience, and also from a representative from 1,000 Friends of Oregon. Love them or hate them, they know the law better than anybody. And I believe that in that capacity, they are doing what they can to help us get an urban growth boundary expansion that is reasonable, which doesn't necessarily mean it's everything we want, but it does mean it's more than we have today. We need to make some not too big changes to the element that I think will help us get there. One of those changes is to focus the element more on our preferred alternative and less on the non-preferred alternatives. We also need to understand that all of our comprehensive plan documents are intended to guide growth for a 20-year planning horizon. Our urban reserve areas, which are the ones shown on the map I believe should be on your screens, those are intended to accommodate a 50-year growth horizon, so they are two very different things. We are shooting for 20 years right now, not 50. And we need to make sure that our element addresses that 20-year need and what we can justify as a city for local need, which is different from regional need, although the two do complement each other, and there will be an area where those circles meet. The local need is basically based on trends within our boundary and what we think we can and should support. It's not very much because obviously we have a small geographical area and a small population and we don't have a lot of buildable land. And as all of you have been watching over the last couple of years, that amount of land has gone down. And so our permit activity has gone down as well, which counts against us when we are looking to expand. We hope, of course, that upon expansion, we will have more available land, permit activity will pick up, and we will actually be able to justify future expansions. I think Josh from DLCD may be able to speak to the expedited process on that better than I can, so I may defer to him if questions on that come up. But we have a local need. It's not huge for commercial land. We do not have the land available to support that need. And so we have information that will support an expansion of our urban growth boundary for more locally serving commercial land. Now, this is entirely separate from basically the PH5 area that is designated for commercial and industrial, which has also been referred to as the now my brain escapes me, Valley Employment Area, Josh?
Southern Oregon.
Southland, thank you. That is based on a lack of large development-ready employment industrial sites specifically targeted to traded sector industry, and basically that means people whose goods or services go well beyond our borders. And I would say, and that border meaning the entire Rogue Valley, to the state, the West Coast, the nation, the Far East, anywhere. We do not have many sites that can support a 20 to 50 acre development that are in close proximity to Interstate 5. They exist, but there's not many of them, and a lot of them are constrained. And that area pretty much stretches from Eugene to Reading. Obviously, there are some lands that are available, but they may not be very close to I-5, meaning a lot of those trucks need to navigate a lot of city traffic to get to those sites, and they tend not to like to do that. And so one thing that we are going to need to do, and that we have acknowledged, is that we do not have a comprehensive plan designation to meet the employment needs. We also do not have an implementing zone to ensure that basically we don't allow things that are not intended to go there. We do not need to come up with those today or as part of this action. We simply need to acknowledge that we will have to do so. And zeroing in on the scenario that we think is the best, which I believe is scenario 3, and perhaps minimizing discussion of some of the other scenarios once we've identified that. We're basically taking a few things out. I think will help us get there. And also simply responding to some of the comments from 1,000 Friends, same issues. Focus on one thing that is reasonable and feasible and supportable within the 20-year horizon. Make sure that the document is directed toward that. And then, as we all expect, once we bring the land that we can justify in right now, it'll probably fill up. I think it will. I think a lot of you do too. And if that happens, we can go to the state and say, hey, look, guys, told you so. We need more land. And they'll say, okay, you can support it. It's kind of a matter of, imagine you're back in elementary school or even high school, and you've got a written test, and you can do the whole thing in your head. You know the answer, but the teacher wants to see your work. They want to know how you got there. So, in order for us to arrive at the desired answer, we also need to show them sometimes hundreds of pages of work that supports it, and then they can say, okay. And then 1,000 Friends says, you've covered your bases, we support it. DLCD says the same, and hopefully, basically, we send it off to the state after we adopt it. They have their time period to object. Nobody does. Boom, we're done. That's a best case scenario, and I think given the comments we have from the state and 1,000 Friends, that helps us to get there. So I didn't have much prepared beyond that because this is a discussion session, and so what I'd like to do is basically have an opportunity for anybody and everybody to ask questions, and I may ask for input from Josh with the state, because he'll offer a perspective maybe that will be different from mine, to help us figure out exactly what we should do to get us what we want, or at least to get us closer to what we want.
We'll go around the table here. Terry, do you have questions for Evan?
Not yet.
So,
Mr. Baseball?
Not presently, no.
Jim? Not at the moment. Okay. I've got a few, but I'll go around the table first.
Feel free to go first.
Ms. Vermillion?
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah?
Well, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but, so in our packet, it says that there are additional recommendations that we didn't have time to discuss in this packet, but we'll get later on.
that was my bad. I know how I did it. I don't know how I did it, but I know how I did it. I saved the wrong document when the save screen was open,
Oh, okay.
and the docket that ended up getting saved as the draft with comments from 1,000 friends was not that document.
Bummer.
And I did not realize that until I was going through, because I wanted to make some written notes to say this should go here. And of course, the one that showed up in your staff report was the working draft of the agenda report for adoption. So my apologies. I goofed. We do have those comments. Hopefully all of you got that in your email. I think we should look at those comments as constructive criticism in order to help us get something that the state will acknowledge with minimal fuss and delay. That does not necessarily mean we have to do every single thing they say, but I think we should at least try to address it.
I see it. So this was a second piece that was sent out
So
after the original packet.
it's
Yes.
the same element, except it has a sidebar where there's some pink highlighted text and
Gotcha.
comments on the sidebar.
Okay.
So we should in essence be substituting what you sent us out the second time for what's in the packet, right?
Correct.
I think that's it for now.
I've got a couple questions regarding regional needs and local needs. What really stinks for Phoenix is that we don't have any more land to build on, haven't had a lot of land to build on for many years. We're all infill, basically, a few pieces here and there, but of course we haven't been growing. And the state looks at us and goes, you haven't been growing, therefore we're not going to allocate as much land to you as if you were growing quickly. So how do we, the state, did they look at us and go, are they a little bit flexible? And they go, well, they haven't grown because they haven't had the land to grow on. Or should I save that for Josh for later?
Yeah, I can answer.
Okay.
Well, I think the short answer is, while we may want to be aspirational, we have to back those aspirations up with numbers. Josh, would you?
It's different for residential and commercial, or employment. We can go into that.
Okay.
What you're talking about, Mayor, is more pertains to the residential, where it's more formulaic.
Yep, I understand that.
But if you want me to come up and talk, I'll be happy to wait and address that later.
Okay.
I'm perfectly happy to share the podium.
I'll hit Josh up with that later, but I got a regional question now. So, the page 5 is more of a regional, to me it's more of a regional. I mean, we keep talking about local, but during the RPS process, 13 years, they laid out a plan through the regional planning problem-solving process to address a regional need. And they allocated that portion of the plan to Phoenix to do the South Valley Employment Center. And it seems like that should be considered separately from our residential need. It's a
And-
regional need, there's regional housing in there to solve a regional housing problem, and also a regional employment need. But we talk so much local and not really regional, which is the big item for us. Page 5 is huge for us. It's probably the most important item, I think, on our council's list, because we need taxes to start increasing. We're hurting budget-wise, and we have no growth. So I think page 5 is probably our saving grace long-term to help Phoenix succeed and not keep having to raise taxes on our citizens, or fees. Same difference in my mind. So why do we spend so much time talking local when regional seems to be even more important?
Well, they complement each other. we are in the fortunate, depends on how you look at it. On one side, you could say fortunate, on the other side, you could say awkward position in that there is no way that we could justify expanding into PH5 based on local need. It's
course
just not there.
Of course not.
But it happens to be, quite literally, in our backyard. Somebody had to get it. And so it would either go to us or Medford. And of course, the whole regional planning effort preceded my time here in the valley by many years. I was not here for it, but we were given something that basically we would not have gotten otherwise, absent the regional planning effort. And so we got this huge gift, but it did come with strings. And some of those strings are that we do still have to use RPS, use the regional economic study to justify how much of that land we think we can fill in the 20-year horizon. And again, if we have, and I've thrown out numbers because I can never remember exactly what they are, but basically we need at least one 50-acre parcel, we need multiple 20-acre parcels. I don't remember the total number. If we get, and let us say for argument's sake that we just got those 3, so we get 90 acres. 3 years from now, they're either built or under construction. If that is happening, when that third one is going, and possibly even when the second one is going, we're already going to the state and saying, we're running out of land, we need more. And they're saying, yep, you guys are going, no problem.
It's a 20-acre horizon, but it could be filled, just hypothetically filled in 5 or 10 years.
Nobody can predict.
Right.
The economy could go gangbusters, or it could tank and take 70 years to fill or not fill at all.
You have some large employers come in and say, we want that land, and you get 2 or 3 large employers come in and fills up pretty quick.
Exactly. So the 50-year horizon land, if things go very well, because people are fleeing more expensive areas and coming to the valley for our quality of life and the fact that they can afford land in a nice place, we might fill the whole thing up in 10 years.
Yeah.
We might do a series of, since we're not going to do it all at once, we might be doing a series of 2 or 3 expansions, but within 10 years, we have it all, and we have developed it. But we must do it incrementally, mostly because if we were to leapfrog into some of those outer areas before we do the inner areas, the cost for the infrastructure would be staggering. Because there's a lot of infrastructure in between that's not getting used, and we have to pay for that too. And so it makes a whole lot of sense to start at our existing border and expand from there. And as those utilities and streets and everything else gets extended, then we just connect to them. And so there is an economic argument to go incrementally, even if those increments are every year.
I've got another question, but I don't want to hog the time here, guys.
Let me just throw out a couple of thoughts.
Go ahead.
Okay. As I see this, our elders at some time in the past sat down with a terrain map and divvied up the land of the state. And they assigned it to various entities, mostly cities, but others, and said, you now have the stewardship for this stuff for the future. You're expected to gain some value from it because it's under your stewardship, but you're really doing it for the state and the region. And PH5 would be an example of that, where things that are not endemic to our city necessarily, but are useful to the greater community, need to be done. But we have the stewardship of that. We have the ownership of doing something with it, and that's fallen on us. And I think that's all we're here about. We're not trying to necessarily say the city needs something in that PH. The city doesn't. The people in the region do, because that's going to be housing and employment. And as we all know from your study, and we know from practical experience, the people that live in one city don't work there. My next door neighbor works in Grants Pass, for example. So consequently, what we're really doing is creating something under our stewardship that has value to everybody else. So I think we need to kind of break a little bit on the lock on, what the city have to do and why we have to justify it, not for the city, but justify it for the region necessarily. Understanding that we have to live with the consequences of that, and the consequences we derive from doing this work better be greater than what we now have for the benefit of our current citizens. Because we're also dealing with quality and quantity of services for people yet unborn who have not moved into the area. But eventually, we have to make sure that what we do for our citizens who currently exist is raise their standard of living, if you will, from quantity and quality of services. So that whatever we do there has got to impact on them in a positive way, rising them to a level that we wish the new people to be at if we ever get them into the area, realizing we're doing it for the larger community, not just for the city. But that's where the benefit of all this, as I see it, comes from. It's for our current citizens and citizens to be. We just have to do it smartly and not build stuff that doesn't drive enough taxes to pay for the new stuff plus the old stuff.
Correct.
So that's kind of my thought process.
If we are successful in that, we will probably have the highest concentration of physical structures and employees in the valley. If we are not successful, we will end up with low-density office parks that don't have a high assessed value and don't have many employees who in turn contribute money back into the community, and we will come up even more in the red than we are now. And so it will be exceptionally important to ensure that we are maximizing efficiency. It is an asset. We are asset managers. And if we end up with development that basically has a low return on investment for the city, it'll kill us.
Yep.
And if we think we're in a bad position financially today, we'll look like, I don't know, pick your worst example, Flint, Michigan, something like that.
Can I interject for a second? But it's your goal, and it's our city manager's goal and city council's goal to not have that happen. Our goal here, and I think we're all committed to as a city, is to come up with zoning plans that don't do what you just mentioned. Zoning plans and amendments to our comprehensive plan which meet the goals and desires of the regional problem-solving process. We're not going to let it happen like you just mentioned. We're going to do exactly what the regional planning process says, or close to it. And one of the great things about the regional planning process was there was some flexibility. There was some commitment by all the stakeholders, all the cities, the Thousand Friends of Oregon, the state, to get together, be a little bit flexible, not be so rigid that you can't move forward, but there was some flexibility, and that built-in flexibility allowed for, I think, the success of the regional planning process. So I hear what you're saying, but we don't want to go there. We want to go to the point where we're properly planning and building on that piece of land that's going to enrich us and meet the goals of the regional planning process, right?
Yes, but we do not have to have those comprehensive plan designations or implementing zones today
I know,
as
right.
part of this. We just simply need to acknowledge that what we have today is not going to get us what RPS wants, but that we are committing to do that.
That's right. Sorry, Ken.
That's okay. So it sounds like if your best case happens, we have to have a lot more coffee shops, spaces built into that area in PH 5s and 10s then, huh?
Actually, quite the opposite. Coffee shops and things that support a large office employment area would certainly be allowed, but they will not be the primary use. And so we're not looking for Costco's, car dealers, strip malls that tend to generate very low return on investment from an assessed value standpoint. And also employment, they tend to have very low employment numbers for their acres.
Yeah, as long as we keep our eye on the ball, that we're really working for the region, but we have to have a touchstone here in the city to make sure we're not harming, but we are improving the city. So I guess that's where I wanted to come to, is everything we look at, we need to also backward integrate into the city before we go forward with what we're doing. That's all.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Just want to make sure I understand the purpose of tonight's study session. So Are we having discussion about whether or not we feel we want to bring in a bunch of land all at one time, despite recommendations from our staff and state staff? Or are we asking questions about the economic element as proposed and making any recommendations to add to that?
Informal information gathering session. You can ask all the questions you want to Evan. We can, we're not.
And Josh?
Yeah, and Josh, we're not going to take in all of our reserve lands. We're not even going there.
I
But
know.
yeah.
It's just, I'm a little confused because that seems to be where the discussion is going, and I want to make sure that we're staying focused on asking questions that stick to the matter at hand, which I think is about the economic element. And if we're talking about that, I think that the recommendations in the economic element are good. You know, they're on the back couple pages here. They're so broad that it's hard to pick anything out, and it's like, no, I disagree. I mean, I think that this is taking us in the right direction. It talks about the city center and the expansion area as two different pieces of economic development. I mean, it makes sense. I don't see, the only thing that I thought, but it's so broad, it says we may, is talking about opening a second, you know, we would consider the possibility of a second urban renewal area, which at this point I would be like, ooh.
Yeah.
But again, that's really broad, like, you may consider sending a rocket to the moon, could be in there too. So I think this looks nice, and staff did a good job on it.
I think a big part of this is simply looking for general agreement from the council that we follow the recommendation of the state and 1,000 Friends, and we emphasize our preferred alternative of scenario 3 and de-emphasize the others. And so that we, simply so that the element itself is more focused on our preferred alternative and spend maybe a little less time talking, you know, basically, okay, we've decided that these aren't our preferred alternatives, so we're not going to keep talking about them in the rest of the document.
Right.
Josh, am I accurately portraying?
So, you know, we're lucky tonight that we have some individuals here which can give us even more information about the future development of our valley. And I'm going to excuse you for just a few minutes. I want to have Mike Montero come up. He has to leave here in just a few minutes to go to another meeting. But I just want to give Mike a few minutes. You want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you think the valley should go as far as planning goes and some of your plans, all right? Thanks, Evan. We'll call you back. I'm going to introduce yourself, okay?
Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Mike Montero. I have an urban development consulting firm in Medford. My address is 4497 Brown Ridge Terrace in Medford. So I appreciate the time to be before you and understand the difficulty of the struggle that you have. There are, I think, common objectives, but there are specific rules. I have before me the letter that Josh wrote, and in principle, I think that it's accurate. However, I think there's something that needs to be at least presented to the City Council for its consideration. And Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the state system works is that it has metrics to project growth that are provided by population, by past growth, by population estimates from Portland State University, and it is designed that way to really offer protection for cities to optimize the use of a scarce resource. I get that. What's unusual in the case of Phoenix is that during the regional problem-solving process, as Josh stated in his letter, and he is correct, that the city of Phoenix was allocated far more acreage for urban reserve land and future urbanization than it could afford or that it could justify on its own. And you have to ask yourself a reason why. Why did they do that? And who's the we? And it wasn't just Phoenix. It was Phoenix, it was all of the participating cities in regional problem solving, along with the state agencies, including the Department of Land Conservation and Development because there was a vision. And the vision was that there needed to be some geographically centrally located employment that could be concentrated for the regional benefit of the whole valley. That was the intent. Josh is also correct in stating that the projections that were made was that all of the urban reserve lands for Phoenix and all of the other cities would be consumed over a period of time that could approximate 50 years. The question is, however, that were there to be demand that had identified itself, and I appreciate Evan's comment, well, if we need more land, we can just use the expedited UGB process and add more. I think what you're going to hear this evening is that demand that has been sitting out in the region for at least 12 years that I'm aware of, now with the successful conclusion of RPS and with the urban growth boundary amendment process that you're going through, is saying, well, maybe now is the time. So there are a group of industries and entities that are appropriate for this area that I'm not going to disclose. Mr. Jones can do that. That I think will not only, it should excite all of us in the valley, not just Phoenix, but the whole region, because it's something that we need badly, those industries need badly, and now very well may be the time for that to occur. The other thing that I'd like to point out that is so unusual in this case, as a rule, what happens in these long-range planning processes is that you have landowners that become competitors, and usually it's like NBA basketball under the basket. They're elbowing each other, and that's not what you have here, and it's very unusual. So while I represent, with the consent of my other client, which is Harry and David Holdings and 1-800-Flowers, we're here collectively to tell you that all of the planning for PH5 and MD5 is being done collaboratively. With it, the transportation planning has engaged with the City of Medford, with your past Public Works Director, with the Oregon Department of Transportation and Jackson County to develop a future transportation system plan that will work for everybody, including preservation of the scarce capacity, the precious capacity that the taxpayers invested in both exits 27 and 24. That's a very unusual situation. So the comments that were offered by Mr. McKenzie, my clients and the folks that you're going to hear from could not agree more. But were there to be the demand for a large campus property, would that be something you'd be interested in? And I know the answer to that already. The answer is yes. What is it? You're going to find out. Part of the issue that also faces you, which we're well aware of, is the cost of infrastructure that has to be invested in order to make these things a reality. Local government, it is beyond the scope of their financial capacity. And frankly, it's beyond the scope of the Oregon Department of Transportation's capacity to make these investments. But collectively, they can be done, and you folks should be well aware of that because there were up to 10 different sources of money that were pooled together to finance Exit 24. Not only should that be the case again, it is the case. So I'm going to cite two things, and then I'm going to excuse myself. And Mayor, thank you very much. I have another appointment in town that I'll have to leave for. But among the things that you've heard a lot about is South Stage Road. And so I would like to brief you a bit about that, both from Medford's perspective and from your perspective.
Hey, well, Mike, for the newer counselors, the South Stage, you speak of an overpass that goes from South Stage Road over to this side over to the east side, okay? It's just an overpass to begin with.
Yeah, some of the preliminary plans have planned for an interchange, but the initial project has been scoped as an overcrossing only. Now, the reason that that's so important for the city of Phoenix is that even when land is brought into your urban growth boundary and applications are made for zone changes, then you're going to have to make findings that there is sufficient transportation capacity to accommodate that growth that you want to have. So that's the way the system works, and it works well that way. If you think about the circumstances for the city of Medford, if any of you have had the unpleasant experience to drive down Barnett Road peak hour or try to come from the North Valley on Interstate 5 and get off at exit 27 in the morning, I don't have to tell you anymore. You've got the visual in your head. ODOT is very sensitive to the performance of exit 27 because there's been a lot of criticism of ODOT. But frankly, it has been the infrastructure constraint at Barnett Road that's created the problem. So some solutions are being worked on that. The reason that South Stage matters to you is that the capacity needed for zone changes to successfully be sought and achieved by the city of Phoenix is going to depend in some measure on that infrastructure capacity. The current estimates are that it's about a $70 million project. You don't have $70 million, nor does the city of Medford, nor does ODOT. But collectively, they're working on it. So the city of Medford has just adopted their transportation system plan. They've committed $15 million to some portion of their North Phoenix Foothills South Stage corridor. That's important. Number two, the city of Medford secured an endorsement from the Oregon Freight Advisory Commission to submit an application for $20 million to the U.S. Department of Transportation. That was successful. It's been applied for. We believe that it has a decent chance of being funded. In addition to that, two property owners, three that we know about, that have been engaged in trying to leverage dollars and value to finance that project. Well, some of them are sitting here. I represent one of them, which is Harry and David. They have a letter of record that they will provide the right-of-way for their portion of the project with no reimbursement. The folks that are going to come to the mic after me have as well, and I believe that Pacific Retirement Services may very well have as well. This level of collaboration, folks, just doesn't happen very often. And the reason that it matters, and I appreciate some comments that I heard earlier today, is that when cities ask for something different than the system provides for, what the state is going to ask for is, well, give us evidence. And all of the things that I've described really are part of that evidence. What you're going to hear from Mr. Mahar and Mr. Jones is more evidence, and it's exciting. I'm not going to take exception to Josh's letter, other than a statement that he makes here, and I'm not taking exception with it. Actually, I agree with it. And it's on page, I think it's page 3. And it talks about Medford's justification for its role in the region's service and trade center, which is what they're doing in MD5. And then it says this: if Phoenix wishes to also utilize a high growth projection for commercial needs, further justification will be needed to explain why this is warranted. I think that's a totally appropriate statement. So what I hear Mr. LeBombard saying is, we want to see the evidence. And part of what I've explained is part of that evidence this evening. What you're going to hear from the other property owners here, I think, is going to be something that's going to be very enlightening for you. Then it will be up to the city to determine, what do we want? Do we want to provide an opportunity for this master campus development to occur, which is exactly what RPS was designed to do, to acknowledge that it may not take 50 years for this to occur. In fact, if the table is set for the kind of collaborative planning with entities that will be in a position to write the checks to pay for the infrastructure, that might be new evidence. So stay tuned. You've got a lot to hear. I don't envy you your decision. These are difficult decisions, and I applaud your service to your community. Now, I'll try to answer questions if you have them, otherwise I'll excuse myself.
While he's here, anybody have a question or two? Good, Sarah.
Sure, hi, Mike.
Hey, Sarah?
I just had a question about, so kind of the question, I think the central question that's in front of us and the kind of push-pull that's happening is about whether to take parcels in incrementally, right? And so I guess what I'm hearing from more of the development perspective is, well, we would like to see a bigger parcel of land taken in at one time. Is that accurate?
Provided that there is an expectation of demand. I
An
want to
expectation of
qualify
demand.
that, yeah.
So let me, ask you a question about that. So what is your concern? I know you don't speak for an entire community of people, but what is your specific concern about the scenario that we're hearing Evan bring up, which is that we open a smaller parcel of land now, and should something pop up, an opportunity for a large employment creating light industrial business come to us, we could open up our application again and bring in more land. So I guess what's the concern, what's the big push to want to bring it in all in now before we've kind of seen what we can do with the piece that we bring in initially?
Sarah, I think that that's an excellent question, and I think that the answer to that is what you're going to hear next, because what I believe that we are seeing come to some fruition is a coordinated effort by a number of entities, all of which you know, that are saying now is the time, and what we need, not the property owners, but this collection of entities, is that we need more land than what's being recommended. And with no criticism whatsoever to Josh or to Evan, this is new information. And so it'll be up to you to hear it, to determine whether it's credible, and then whether that leads you to, as he's recommended here, to explain why it's warranted.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer it? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mike.
Anything else?
We're doing really good on time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Randy, we don't have a lot of time, but Randy, why don't you pop up for a few minutes? This is Randy Jones, and Mike Mahar is back there. They're a tag team with development here in the Valley, and he's got some information he wanted to impart upon us. And
Do you have the ability, Evan, to put this up on the screen?
No.
Okay, so I have some copies. There's 3 pages here. I don't have one for everybody. Every other person can share.
Yeah, we can share some around the table. So let me introduce yourself while we're passing things out.
Okay, so I'm Randy Jones, Mahar Homes. I'm kind of the operations manager, and I oversee development and infrastructure and entitlements and those types of things. Basically, what you're receiving, the first page is, and if we can, I was Terry Baker's 4th grade school teacher, so Terry, let's stay on page 1 here, and I'll get you it. And then when I say turn to page 2, we'll go to 2, okay?
Oh, it's tight of me.
Got it?
I got it.
Terry knows the drill. So what we put together here is the tax lots and the owners of PH5, as well as MD5 in the southern part of MD5 in Medford. And you'll see that basically there's 2 owner groups between PH5 and MD5. And if you look at the Arrowhead Land and Cattle Company, and if you look at the Arrowhead Ranch Holding Company, those have become one. And basically, Mike Mahar, who's sitting behind me, is the owner of half of all of that, and then Dr. David Chamberlain, the other half. And I've helped them work through this process. And then if you go look a little north, you'll see Mahar Duke South Stage LLC. Again, that's Mike Mahar, who's sitting behind me, owns half of. And then you see Bear Creek Orchards, Inc., which is 1-800-Flowers. They have a larger piece there than they do in PH5. They have, I think it's about 18 acres in PH5. So this is one of those rare things that all this entire employment area is owned by just a couple companies. Mike and I happen to be in the land development business, building business. We build houses, office buildings, medical buildings, things like that. So we're very interested in this. We weren't at the table when this was designed for Phoenix. We did have the Medford piece, and we have since acquired the Phoenix piece. And I'm going to share with you some of the things we've been working on for a number of years now. The infrastructure, let's talk about that. Very, very little of Phoenix's PH5 infrastructure will come from the south and head north. Very little of it will connect at Home Depot or Fern Valley and head north. The Fern Valley portion will be when you go through your residential lands and head north, and then there is some of that comes into our piece. I think Arrowhead's all us, just okay. So we understand where that goes. We also understand how the water that's going to serve those lower areas can be handled with your existing water tank. We also know that the bulk of your northern part of, well, the bulk of PH5 will not be handled by that reservoir. I've already checked that out. It's not big enough. I want to see what your consultants have come up with, because we've been studying this for 5 years and have some ideas of our own of how to get water there. I also want to tell you something that a lot of people don't know, and that is that the sewer for the bulk of PH5 will not come down to that crossing to the intercept that goes over by the Exit 24 stores. To get gravity flow sewer, which is what you want and we want, it's going to have to go down to where the South Stage overcrossing is and be bored underneath the creek, just like the gas line did, like a Vista did just recently. The gas supply is going to come from that north end. Okay, the sewer is going to go from through the north end in a cooperation with Rogue Valley Sewer. I've met with their engineers. We're designing this system. We have an idea of how to do that. By putting it there, it's going to save about 4 to 5 sewer pump stations that would be part of PH5 in order to get sewer down to the south end. Because if you look at the topographical lines on that map I showed you, you'll see that there's some severe topography. It's not cost effective to dig a 25-foot deep ditch through solid rock to get the sewer to the south end. It's much more cost effective to spend $1.5 million and bore under the freeway in Bear Creek to get gravity flow. If we had to do the 4 to 5 sewer pump stations to get to the intercept on the south end, they run $500,000 to $700,000 a pop, and they run $30,000 to $50,000 a year to maintain. That would be a huge cost on the businesses that would be occupying those buildings and on the city of Phoenix. Okay, you also know that there's the Campbell substation, which is on the north end, and that's where the bulk of the power that's going to come from, that's going to serve PH5. So it appears like I'm requesting a cherry stem, actually not. Now let's go to why are we so excited about this, and why do we believe the timing is now for thinking big? Josh wouldn't know this, Evan wouldn't know this, they're not in our meetings. But I'm in the meetings, first person. And tomorrow I'm meeting with the 2 top execs at Providence Hospital System. Last week, Mike Maher met with the head of the Asante system. I've met with RCC president, who's in conversation with the SOU president and the OIT president, and they meet quarterly, and we'll be at their next quarterly meeting, looking about putting together a cooperative training campus on this property so that we can train medical and technical jobs workforce-type housing jobs, living wage jobs. We can train people here so that maybe they'll stay here. Asante has a $750 million expansion plan that they're trying to put together and raise money for. Now, that's just Asante, not Providence. But their biggest problem is they'll get young docs out of medical school and the nurses and all to come live here for a while and work for them, but they soon move away because they don't have family here and it's not where they came from. We can change that with this employment campus. We're thinking big. We have the capacity to do this collaboratively with everyone. You heard from Mike Montero before I got up here. We've already signed the letter donating the right-of-way along South Stage. Okay. We know that we're going to have to help put together these employment campuses. Not only, we're not in this to sell them just a piece of land. We're in this to enhance our entire community. We know the type of housing that Phoenix wants to do, starting at Fern Valley and headed north there, will be workforce-type housing. That's what's needed. We don't need to do McMansions. We can meet the density qualifications with the different forms of housing. We know how to do that. We're in that business right now. Mike back there, he's a year younger than me, but we're getting a little longer in the tooth. And we're not going to be around to see the end of this, but by God, we want to be here at the start of it, and we have the capacity to do that. To bring it in small little pieces and see how it goes won't work. I'm just going to tell you right now, we're not interested in that. If that's what you guys want to do, we're not interested. We'll just keep farming. We're big picture people. We've delivered before. We'll deliver now. We're the ones who talk where the sports parks is over across where the South Stage organ. We're the ones that talked to the city of Medford about pushing their ball fields to the north and talked with the state to design a future interchange. That's what's taken place. It happened right here with the people in this room. And we're collaborators, and we're willing to help put this together. So that's page 1. You look quickly at page 2, and you're going to see what we did with Jackson County roads, because that whole right-of-way along there is under the control of Jackson County Roads, North Phoenix. And there's certain spacings for major arterial collector-type crossings, and we've worked that out with Jackson County Roads. They don't want to have another fiasco like they had just recently where Costco is between Central Point and Medford. Jackson County Roads won't participate in that type of mess up again. We've gone to them with their top engineers. We've laid out the spacings from where South Stage is going to come into North Phoenix, and you see the footages we put on there, and we've collaborated that between how it works for Phoenix and how it works for Medford, and Jackson County Roads will agree with this. Okay, so we're working through this. If you want to take a look at that map a little closer, and you look up to where Campbell Road is by Two Hawks Winery, we believe that corner right there, a huge amount of that land should be and could be where this employment campus starts. I've already told you that's where the power is going to have to come from. So why not put it close to where the power? That's where the natural gas come from. And if you look just a little bit to the east, I haven't seen your water plan, but we figured out where your next water tower needs to be. Now, I haven't seen that on your plans yet, but we'll talk with your engineers on that. Yes, the housing needs to start on Fern Valley and work north, but the employment stuff needs to start north and work along the corridor, because as you come down, if you want to go to the third page now and just take a quick look there, this is a rough topo. I haven't done a complete topo on this yet, so this is just kind of the public maps available. But if you look down on the south end and kind of over where Home Depot is and all that, what do you see? You see a rather steep embankment. That's something that we don't want to have to dig down as deep as one would have to dig down. It costs 3 or 4 times more than just putting the sewer lines and the drain lines where they need to go. I don't know if I've run out of my time or ready for questions, but
10 minutes, that's pretty good. I have a question or two, but I don't want to hog your time again. Anybody have questions for Mr. Jones? Stuart?
How many acres do you think you need?
basically, we're in negotiations and discussing with all these different entities, large entities. We're going to need a lot of land, not a little land. 50 or 100 acres doesn't cut. It's not worth our time. It's not worth your time, actually. And we can't be coming back and doing Mother May Eyes all the time. You have to, this was originally done with the idea that this would be the South Valley Employment Campus. It never was intended to be parceled in on little tiny pieces. And it never was intended to be just what Phoenix needs. I can tell you this, if we're able to put this together collaborative with all these entities, including OHSU, they're interested in talking. We're talking all the big players. We are a regional medical center. You might say, oh my goodness, they don't pay taxes, the nonprofits. But everything attached to them does. And there's a lot of attachments. You want to look at the OIT situation. I think most of you know Jessica Gomez, Rogue Valley Microcircuits, and she's ran for some political offices. Jessica came to us 5-6 years ago. She lives in one of our subdivisions in East Medford, just a working class, upper middle class neighborhood. And she says, I want 50 acres. And I said, why do you need 50 acres? She says, because I need to build the type of buildings with room to expand for my company, and I need people, and I know people like me and my suppliers and all, they want to come join me and build. She says, I don't personally need 50 acres, but I want to buy 50 acres and I'll pay cash for it now. I says, we can't supply it. We don't have it. This concept that we've been talking about for 15 plus years isn't ready to go. It's now ready to go. If it wasn't for a certain land planner in this town, Jessica would have moved her company out of our valley. But this land planner went and knocked on doors and found some vacant buildings that could be retrofitted enough for now for her to stay long enough until we can get something like this going. So if she wants 50 acres, she's just one. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit, too, about the market-ready, the so-ready type businesses, the market-traded. There's very, very few of them that are going to come to this valley. That's proven itself out. We have a better chance with something like these, getting some of the big boys and big girls to come here if they have something that's ready to go. Okay, we're going to have more of the Jessica Gomez's in the 10, 20, 30 acre need. We're going to have way more of them here a lot sooner than we're going to have traded sector businesses. I know, I've seen how hard it is to get traded sector here. I'm a past chairman of the Medford-Jackson County Chamber of Commerce. I'm a past president of the Oregon Home Builders, and this is stuff I know. So I'm saying, bring it all. And then water seeks its own level, but if you're going to parcel us in at 50 or 100 acres, we're not interested. It's not worth our time.
Anybody else with a question?
I have a question for Evan real quick. So what is, under the current iteration of the application, which we've been through kind of a couple of different scenarios, so what is the number of acres that we're discussing bringing in at this point in this current application?
I don't have an exact. There are a certain number of minimum size parcels that have been recommended, and I know it was at least a 50 and 220s. It may have been a 50 and 420s, and then allowances for smaller. If we have the support, I would say written support from some very large stakeholders saying that's not enough. We have people in hand. We may be able to justify more, but this is where the state comes in and will make that. Just simply saying we need more is not going to make the state say yes. So we will need our local and regional partners to basically show that the need is actually greater than we think it is.
And And I guess that's some of the questions that I have, for Mike and for you, is, coming in, we're hearing that there's an interest, right, but we're not being presented with very specific information, so it's hard to say that we can justify to the state in an application that we want to bring in more acreage without anything concrete. So that's
Totally
the-
understand, and we can certainly get you some letters and all, and I've given you names of entities that are real. They've been spoken. We've had these conversations for years, and it sat dormant for a while because Phoenix and Medford weren't going anywhere. So I mean, why would it, so I've just said a whole lot that Josh doesn't know about, and I've sat on committees with Josh, and we're prepared to take this to the level and follow the intent of the South Valley employment. And he's got that in his letter here, Mike Montero read it. It's just that until now, until we get here, and you guys still have a little further to go, Medford's got theirs through, we got it, and we're willing to help, and we just happen to be all of PH5.
And so the projects that you're talking about, those opportunities are light industrial opportunities, which is how
Yeah.
we're intending to use that land. So you talked about the potential for a training center that would be a partnership with Providence, you said, and with SOU? Just to
Think OHSU, think Providence, think Asante, all competitors working together for this. Think SOU, OIT, RCC, all competitors collaboratively coming together at the same location. That's about as big as it gets, and those are who we're talking to.
And that's being thought about? You keep saying think, or is it being actively discussed? Where's the
It's
other?
actively being discussed. A lot of these institutions have 4, 6, 10-year budget cycles. If we don't keep the discussion going now with the idea that it can happen, if it can't happen, then it just isn't going to happen. And right now, we control the bulk of all of it. And Mike and I are the only developers in the ownership group. Okay?
And so, and I know that you all are going to follow up with more information, it sounds like. Is that correct?
What about? What is it?
Following up with more information
Oh,
about specific.
this is just to share with you at a study session that there's an awful lot of work being done that you haven't seen.
Okay, well, it's good to hear.
You haven't seen all the infrastructure. By the way, development pays for infrastructure. We're not looking for a handout from you. We'll pay for it.
Right.
We'll pay the SDCs and the housing port that you can save money and put things in so you can raise the bar for everybody.
I think for us, just real quickly too, one of the things that I think Phoenix has maybe some challenges around when it comes to expanding development is that we have a very small staff, right? So of course, maybe in terms of the direct funds that come from SDCs for development, we don't have a huge staff, so sometimes that's a concern.
We're very aware of that. We've done development here, and we're still waiting to be paid on some money you owe us for a long time.
Okay.
No, you did hit some of a question I had earlier. Sometimes the idea that they're pie in the sky ideas, there's nothing there. But I look forward to getting even more evidence of these potential partners joining you guys and coming to us with some really concrete information as we move forward. And I look forward, during the RPS process, it was a collaborative effort between the state, the city, the RV COG. It was, everyone came together to make something happen. And one of those things that was made to happen was the South Valley Employment Center. So I'm hoping to keep the ball rolling in a collaborative effort, and we'll see what comes of it. But I appreciate you guys coming and, enlightening us a little bit about what you're...
We're going to keep the ball rolling. We're a little ahead of the curve on this, and we will prove up. We generally understate and overdeliver. That's pretty much how we've been the last 40 years. So we're there. But if you foreclose us out, we got other lands and other things to do. We're just asking not to foreclose us out. We're asking you to think big, because you've got the perfect perfect solution that's going to help the city in so many areas, and we want to be part of that.
Yeah, we're certainly not going to close it out. You know, we need, this is a huge endeavor for Phoenix. We need the revenue, we need the expansion, and it's going to be good for us whatever way we go, as far as expansion goes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a
Appreciate it.
question.
Go ahead.
What made you think of the metal training facility, or metal health training?
It's the number one growth industry in our valley is medical. It's what, we're losing too much talent. We're spending all this money, like I said, Asante, $750 million additional expansion plan in the next 10 years. And their hardest problem is getting the professionals to stay here. Hire, they stay for a while, they get a little resume built, and then they go back wherever they came from. So why don't we just train them here? Why are we losing? I don't know how many people I know that went over to OIT to get training. They're now working up at Intel that I know personally. Young, bright engineers, male and female, talent that if we had a place for them to work here, train them here, and we had a place for them to work, OIT is a phenomenal training, technical training institution. This valley isn't capitalizing on it. We can do it right here. We can capitalize on that and get people to stay. The housing, where you need the housing and you need the SDCs on, you need the utility fees paid, you need to freshen your infrastructure so you don't have to keep raising the taxes on your citizens. It's all right here to do, but you can't do it thinking small. You can't do it piecemeal. It just doesn't work. That's simple math. I'm an old fourth grade school teacher. That's just simple math.
All right. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate you, Mike, coming tonight.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. McKenzie, where were we? You know, I just want to bring those gentlemen forward, give us some idea of what their plans were, and just plant some seeds. And did you want to go have Josh come up and you guys can tag team?
It might be okay for me to talk and then have you can wrap
Sure,
it up.
sure.
I mean, I don't have to say it, I don't think.
Why not? We're flexible.
Sure.
Thanks for coming, Josh.
No problem. I'm Joshua Bombard, Department of Land Conservation Development. I'm the Southern Oregon Regional Representative. My office is in Medford, 37 North Central. Okay, so I think a lot of this conversation today is, to be honest, a little premature. We're talking about acreage needs, and that kind of conversation usually happens at the Urban Growth Boundary Amendment stage. I know it's definitely first and foremost on many of your minds. There's a bunch of new information that was presented tonight that might influence the city's approach and proposal as far as how much acreage that it's going to be requesting to bring into its urban growth boundary. I'm happy to have a little bit of that conversation. I think some of it that's premature, like I said, but what I first want to do is talk about what I said in my letter, which really wasn't, actually I didn't speak to acreage at all. I talked about this being, as regional problem solving, kind of allocated land. It was for a 50-year need. Actually, it was for a doubling of the region's population, which at the time equated to a 50-year need. Population growth has slowed since that time, and it's actually probably greater than that as far as looking at accommodating a doubling of the region's population. So that's all I wanted to do, was kind of point that out to say, hey, this is part of a bigger plan for the valley to accommodate a doubling of the region's population. I think it's kind of even more important from what we just heard. But what I do want to do first, before we get into that, because I know it's probably going to get there, judging by the mayor's face. No. But
whatever you want to do.
what I want to talk about is the commercial aspect of things. What I pointed out in my letter was that there's a couple scenarios in your economic opportunities analysis in the local. So you guys have kind of done double the work that a normal community would do when it's going to justify its employment need. Normally, when a community goes to, check out how much employment land it has, and often that's kind of a precursor to coming in and asking for an expansion of the boundary. They only need to do a local economic opportunities analysis. Because of the allocation specifically for this area, the size, and because it was tied to regional problem solving, you did a regional economic opportunities analysis too. You looked at the regional needs from Eugene down to Reading. And that's completely fine, and I think that gets at what you were talking about earlier. So I guess the first point I would make is when a region or when an area is looking at projecting its employment needs, there's a lot more flexibility than projecting its housing needs. Housing is pretty formulaic. You look at population growth, you look at persons per household, you look at some demographics. It's a pretty straightforward equation as far as projecting how many housing units you need. Employment's a lot different. It's a lot more complicated. So there's a bit more flexibility allowed to local jurisdictions to make some calls, like whether, like in Medford's case, as Mr. Montero pointed out, they chose to go big, and basically they asked for the largest share of commercial retail land that they could justify because they're, you know, the retail center for not only Southern Oregon, but a quite larger geographic region. So there's more flexibility in that. So in addition to that, you now have a regional economic opportunities analysis, which provides you with even more flexibility than kind of the traditional local economic opportunities analysis. However, one of the things I pointed out in my letter, and I'm going to continue to point out, is the South Valley Employment Center, PH5, what we've all been talking about today. I mean, there is PH10, which is just down the road, which also has some commercial and other stuff in there. But we've been talking about, you know, the South Valley Employment Center. That land was brought in, and it had a specific condition on it that it needs to be industrially zoned. So there's a nuance there, not industrial uses, but industrially zoned. And industrial zoning allows for more than just pure industry. It allows for some ancillary, some porting uses. But what the region knew it didn't want was for this to be a big box retail center. This amount of land would have never been allocated to Phoenix. This amount of land, at least, would have never been allocated to Phoenix based on that. You just can't justify regionally needing more of that.
We're not even going there. We're not looking for a Costco or 7-Elevens. We're looking for something something that meets.
Okay, so here's why I'm getting there. It's because a couple of scenarios that are in your local EOA actually kind of weigh the commercial aspect a bit more heavily, and I just wanted to make it clear that we don't support that. 1,000 Friends also said the same thing because they were involved throughout the entire regional problem-solving process. And I say that specifically, Mr. Montero is not here anymore, but he came to City of Phoenix meetings, he came to Jackson County meetings, and then he also came to the state, the Land Conservation and Development Committee meetings, representing Harry and David, now 1-800-Flowers, about converting that 74 acres or whatever their holdings are, I don't know exactly what that is, to commercial. Because they knew that, they know they can make more money in a shorter period of time to do that. So I'm just putting that out there, that's already been, put out there. It's not something that's hidden. So what I don't want to see happen is for Phoenix to bring in a huge chunk of land and then allow for that to be converted over to something that totally does not meet the intent of why this land was brought in. And we've also established some steps. I mean, you would, to convert this to commercial, you'd have to go back to a regional problem-solving policy committee, which actually doesn't exist anymore. It'd have to be reconstituted. It would be made up of all representatives of all 6 of the cities that participated and the county to agree to a change to make that happen. But what I don't want to see happen is for you to set that up in your local EOA, that's something that the city wants to see happen.
I can't speak for the entire council, of course, but personally, I have no intent to not meet the intent of what the land was designed to be used for through the RPS process, 13-year process, and I have no desire to change what that land should be used for. I want to use it for what it was used for and get the cooperation of the state, other cities, the other stakeholders. That's what we're looking for. I think. I could be, I'm not speaking for council, but I don't want to deviate from what the plan actually calls for.
And I think that's why it's important to have a really strong and clear application and comprehensive plan, because then future councils, right, when we're gone and all of of this has been kind of hashed out, that carries forward.
So you're speaking of the application for the expansion, you're not speaking of right now, or the document that we're putting
No,
forward?
the economic element also has general goals for how we want to develop overall, so we want to make sure that that's consistent with what our overall plan is for the later application.
Just for council, I think an application comes in later, when we're going to apply for the
But
expansion.
this is part of that.
Yeah, it is.
So we're updating the comprehensive plan in anticipation of submitting an application to the county and then up to the state. And they check this. This is why we're discussing it, is
Yep.
because they want to make sure that it's consistent with
Okay, thank you.
goals.
Yep, you're right.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, my letter overall, I think, said you guys are doing a good job, and you did, like I said, with the regional EOA, you're doing more work than what most communities do, and so definitely give you credit. I think the most recent version that I read before, I just got back from camping about 30 minutes before this meeting, so I didn't have a chance to reread it. What was that?
What's your priority?
Hey, I'm here now, and I left early to come back here. So I haven't reread it, but I think it largely addresses our concerns. But that's really what I wanted to focus, what I want to talk about today on is the commercial aspect. It's completely within the intent of this area to have commercial activities that support the larger light industrial use of the site. It's not to say no commercial uses, but what I can say explicitly is that it wasn't intended purely for commercial uses. And getting into kind of the later conversation about the acreage, Mr. Jones' point was talking about 50 or 100 acres being small acreage. I mean, if you talk to Business Oregon, if you talk to SoReady, that's not small acreage in their mind. There's very much a lack of 20, 50 acre sites, and that's part of the regional EOA. The concern that I would need to kind of reconcile from now until the UGB amendment expansion period would be, how do you preserve the integrity of that total amount of land, knowing that you all will change over, these guys might change over, I might change over by the time this is built out, maybe built at all, who knows? How do you preserve that integrity of that industrial nature? And what we're really talking about is higher wage jobs. So an area that can supply higher wage jobs, not more retail, minimum wage stuff. So that's what our region needs. You talk to Business Oregon, so already they support that. So how do you preserve that if all of this is brought into the UGB amendment, or into your UGB amendment application up front?
And Josh, I
versus
think we're really
incremental?
open to preserving it, and if you have some suggestions of how to preserve it, zoning changes where we have to do to preserve that intent long-term, how it transcends those that might be here, or Randy and Mike Mahar and yourself even. So if you have suggestions on how to preserve what needs to be done in order to move forward with good things for Phoenix, I think we're for it.
Yeah, and so I'm going to need to think on that. This is new information for me, so to kind of
We can help.
sit on that. I figured.
And we're not sitting here wanting retail commercial. That was the main part of Mike and I talked.
Totally, and I get that. I think the picture that you painted is great, but as we know, sometimes that picture actually doesn't happen. It might not happen right away. It might not happen for 15, 20 years. And then, like I said, maybe we're all gone, and then someone else has a different picture that they want to paint for that area.
Some of this will be done, but I think we can help get this preserved in a way that there's a little bit of legacy here that comes up.
It's possible.
Okay, thank you.
So that's really all I was wanting to focus on, so if you have any questions, great. If not, I can sit down.
I have questions, but again, I don't want to hog the stage. You go.
I wonder how you feel about that large-scale medical health training facility. Is that something that sounds exciting to you, that would work great for that area?
Well, I mean, these guys know, the valley better than I do, and especially this aspect of things. I mean, this is definitely a growing cluster, as it's referred to, in the business field. This is a huge cluster. It's growing for sure. The Pier Office Park, I mean, is that, where's Evan? Is an office park allowed as an outright use in your light industrial zone right now? I was trying to pull it up when we were talking. The concern that I would have is it's a condition that came through the regional problem-solving plan, which was ratified by 6 cities and the county. To make any changes to that, I would have to go through all those processes again, which restricted restricted the zoning to industrial zoning. Now, your industrial zoning has some flexibility, your light industrial in particular, and that's really what we're talking about here, likely not a heavy industrial user. I think what was always kind of talked about is it would be more than just an office park. It would be some research and development kind of thing, something that would be more than just a bunch of workers sitting there, plugging away or whatever. So I think that's what I heard from you guys as far as what this would do. I think that could work. My concern would be just from a standard office park standpoint, the question that I would have is, aren't there other places in the valley that you could put a standard office park? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, right up there in Medford, right adjacent to this, you could do that. This is supposed to be for something a little bit different than that, a little bit of a step up, some more higher wage jobs.
Well, what I heard, it is a step up. It's not going to be a bunch of office parks going on up there. I hope not. We don't want that. I don't want that anyway. But, so just all I'm asking for from you and the state is to be as flexible as you guys were during the regional planning process. I know you worked with all the cities, you added technical value to what they were doing, you were there at the right point without micromanaging every single step. And we had the technical advisory groups from each city meeting, we had Cavallero working with you guys, and it was a nice collaborative effort to bring about the South Valley employment area. I want that same emphasis as we move forward. I don't want roadblocks. I want, we can do this, but you got to change it a little bit over here or do this a little bit differently and work with us to try to make this happen. Because to be frank with you, if we don't get land developed in Phoenix and get housing and get people paying taxes, excuse my friends, we're screwed. We had to raise fees on all our citizens like two weeks ago because the cost of running this city is increasing faster than our tax base. It's not going away. Center Point's developing, Talent developing, other cities are developing. We don't have anywhere to go. So we need to develop in our city. And I'm going to ask you guys to be flexible, work with us like you did during the process for RPS. And that's really what I'm asking from you.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing right now. Okay. If I were to be putting up a roadblock, I would be saying that this isn't something at all that we can support. I'm not saying that at all. We're talking about some nuances about commercial versus industrial. Yeah. We'll probably be talking about some nuances about how much is too much, maybe later on. Yes. And that doesn't mean that's a roadblock. A roadblock would be saying, no, you can't justify this at all. A roadblock is not 150 versus 272 acres. That's not a roadblock.
For example, if Intel said, we're moving from Northern California, whatever, some huge entity came down and said, no, we want the whole thing. We want it now. We're Microsoft, we're Intel, we're AMD. We want to put a campus here. And we're going to do a good job. We're going to large parcels, and it meets what you're looking for, and we can take the whole thing in all at once. It would make sense to me. If someone came and said, we want to piecemeal it out for things that don't meet what what the original plan called for, then I'd be in agreement with you that we're not going to go there. But I think what's going to drive, I hope what drives how much land we put into the UGB boundary is what entities are going to come and land there.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I share an office with Business Oregon. I used to share an office with So Ready, communicate with them regularly. I get that. What I'll say though is, in the state of Oregon, it's different than other states, and I've worked in other states, is that it's not necessarily all about your aspiration. Like, a lot of communities have high aspirations. I represent Douglas County. The first meeting I had with the city of Sutherland, who has hundreds of acres of industrial land, mind you, the first meeting I had with them was, wouldn't it be great to have a Google here? And the first thought I had is, I know a lot of friends in the Bay Area, and it's like, sorry, Google isn't going to relocate to Sutherland. No offense, you got a lot of good stuff going for you. I really like that area, but it's probably not going to happen. So it's about kind of balancing those community aspirations, which can come back to bite you, mind you. We've seen that around the state, communities wanting to do certain things, and Annecy and big areas are doing whatever, and putting infrastructure in there to support something that doesn't come to fruition, and then they need to raise their rates for all the rest of the community because this didn't happen. So it's kind of the safeguard. So anyway, just putting that out there. It's about the balancing those aspirations with realism, and I'm happy to have some further conversations with these guys about what potentially could happen out there.
Thank you. Around the table. Jim, anybody else?
Well, one of the things I think about when I talk about commercial activities, and you lay on correctly, we want higher paying jobs. Higher paying jobs also come with the expectations of other things that are more illustrious, one of which would be housing. When you look at PH5, for example, we have an unknown start date if we're going to do this at all, and then it will ramp up over several years into the future before it becomes totally mature. But at some point, you have to have housing on board, available with a door open for the first person that arrives to do the job. I'm not sure how we go about doing that valley-wide to make sure that we have appropriate housing to the pay scales that are coming in. I don't think we can do that here in the city by itself. I don't think we have enough land or whatever. So that's another regional component. It's not just the industrial part, but it's housing them. And I'm kind of worried about how that's going to actually come down. Who's going to do that, where, and how we, with really tight housing market now, there's not much flex for bringing another person in. So when they start bringing in, tens and hundreds of them to do this, we have to have a place for them to go. But I'm not sure how we get the housing built before we get the facilities ready to go on day one. 'Cause usually the housing follows after, in my experience doing that. So, I mean, any perspective from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a region problem, it's not a state problem, it's not a West Coast problem, it's a problem in every area that is experiencing population growth. So we're not alone, that's a good thing, and it's also a bad thing because housing is an issue that's happening across the country in every area that's experiencing population growth. Here, population growth is occurring from natural population growth, but it's also becoming, happening mostly from migration. So people coming into this area because it's an attractive area to live. I mean, these guys know firsthand. They build a lot of homes in the valley. They know what the demand is. The state knows that there's a shortage of housing. We at the legislature and our department have enacted rules and state statutes to try to, help streamline housing development and to help broaden the types of housing that's allowed in different uses. This last legislative session, it's controversial, but the legislature just required cities over 10,000 to allow duplexes in single-family zones, triplexes, fourplexes in any city over 75,000. So that's a controversial thing, but those are steps that will help open the market up to allow certain things to happen. But it's, the market is what the market is. We underbuilt for a long period of time. And whether we can come out of it, I don't know, but it definitely plays into something like this because you can't attract a large footprint employer from out of the area without having adequate housing supply.
I heard earlier about maybe a training facility for medical type people. To me, that means people coming in, spending some amount of time in training, some staying and some leaving. But during that training period, they're going to need housing, which may be less illustrious than a regular house, for example. So there has to be some sort of dormitory situation, I think, going on, which I haven't heard really discussed much. But for those that do stay, or those that come in to work there to train them, whatever the combination is, higher pay scales, larger, more expensive, valuable houses. And I don't know who's going to build those ahead of those people arriving, coming into a tight market. And, when you get too much of a demand on a small supply, prices and costs, rent, housing costs go up. So I'm trying to figure out how to avoid having a calamity here because suddenly we have great training going on or great commercial stuff, but no place to house the people. And then you end up with San Francisco with those with the most money driving everybody else out. So it's kind of like two things that have to happen, but one is the horse and one's the cart.
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say first is these guys are thinking about that, hopefully. I'm assuming they are. Secondly, and as you know, it's not something that Phoenix is going to be able to do on its own. This region has a larger travel shed. I mean, there's a lot of people commuting from Grants Pass over, vice versa. Not that we support that. We want to, as a department, as a state, we want to try to lower the amount of miles people are driving and to live closer to where they work. Those are the type of things we're trying to further. But in a valley like this, where you have a bunch of communities that are really close to each other, some abutting each other, there are opportunities that may present themselves, elsewhere first, like Medford, for instance. They just did a successful urban growth boundary amendment to expand into areas and a lot of that's for housing. Mr. Mahar right here owns some of the land that's in those urban reserves, as well as a bunch of other people. So it's a matter of, I think, the region meeting that need, not just Phoenix. But we'll get into that conversation later when we come to Phoenix's housing needs in your urban growth boundary amendment, because as the mayor knows, at least, the population projections for Phoenix don't warrant a substantial growth. Or what I would say in that regard is, if you can get a little bit and that gets developed and gets built on, then that is grounds for justifying through a more expedited process than what y'all have gone through so far, another expansion. An incremental housing expansion isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when you have communities adjacent to you that have more land.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of population growth, we don't have any land to build on. There's no subdivisions being built here, so our population growth is stunted. But it just blows me away that we're talking about a regional need for housing, and we have the regional planning process, which has some allocation for housing over by PH5, some high density, low density, medium density, residential housing. I think to myself, the housing shortage here in the valley, we have builders that own land that want to build homes, and I think to myself, why not build more homes to help solve the regional housing crisis with the land that's sitting there waiting to be built with homes, with builders that are ready to build the homes. I sit there and say, why don't we just build some homes and help solve the housing crisis regionally? It just blows me away that we just
I would say that's a significant oversimplification of it. But I think the housing conversation, I'm here to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. That's not what I came to talk to you about, considering you're looking at adopting your comprehensive plan amendment for economic element. I think that conversation will probably come together and have this bigger picture conversation at your UGB amendment time.
Okay, cool.
I have a quick question, please.
Go.
So I keep hearing the term, like, if we wanted to bring in more land, we could do like an expedited application to bring more in. How long would something like that take?
Well,
I know that's.
so the assumption would be, so the expedited process would, to be honest, probably wouldn't be applicable for this employment side of things.
Okay.
It would be applicable for your residential side of things. And really what we've done is part of what, at the state, what we're trying to do is to help streamline things, is we've come up with a calculator for communities to use. They don't often want to use it because there's assumptions built into it, and sometimes communities want to develop their own assumptions, and a lot of them have spent time doing that. So it would be very easy for the city of Phoenix to use in regards to your residential land supply. Because this is a unique thing, this whole regional justification, it's not going to be that applicable, the quote-unquote expedited process. But what I will tell you is you have a regional EOA right now that's fresh, it's new. If you were to bring in, 150 acres to look at your acreages, or what, I'm just pulling a number out of a hat right now. But the regional EOA called for a need for, a 50 to 70 acre property, 5 20-acre properties. You bring in a portion of that, looking at, kind of balancing that with, this is a 20-year horizon versus a 50 or maybe even longer horizon with the doubling in the region's population. If that were to develop your 100 or your 150, or even an increment thereof, and you have a fresh regional EOA, you would come to the state and say, hey, we've got demand and we want to continue moving forward, and this is the next area we want to move into. We've had 20 acres develop up because of the rapid rate of that. We want 50 or whatever, and we think we can justify a little bit more than what's developed. I think that process right there, it wouldn't be the quote-unquote expedited process, but it would be a much quicker process because you wouldn't have to go through all of your requisite studies because you already have them done. Now, if it takes 20 years for that land to develop, that might be a different story. Now you have a 20-year-old regional EOA, and you probably, as a community, even though it takes a while to do this kind of stuff, there's a lot of good information in there. The sectors of the employment sectors might have changed at that point. You can envision how fast things change, right? 20 years from now, you might want to update your plan, and it's probably not going to be a plan you can rely on to justify that. We would probably say, hey, that's pretty old. You want to update that, and just to make sure everything's the same. So I hope hopefully that answered your question in a roundabout way.
It does. So just to recap briefly, so the more that we can demonstrate that we can actually develop what we're taking in, the better the likelihood of the state approving more.
For sure.
Okay.
But if I'm a developer, I'm sitting there asking, well, I need a time frame. I mean, I've got OIT and Asante coming in for this chunk over here, 100 acres, but I've got a Providence Hospital that wants to build also, and they want to make a move in 9 months or a year. And from a developer standpoint, I'm saying to myself, I can't afford to just do little tiny chunks. I need to bring in more. But I really didn't get an answer as to how long it takes to do the process, not expedited, but faster than normal, but not expedited. Is it a year? Is it 5 months? Is it 30 days? I mean,
It could definitely be less than a year I would say it's more like, how long does it take to get through your plot process and submit it to the state, to be
so
honest.
we'd have to go through the entire process again of updating our comprehensive plan?
No, unless it takes 20 years for that to develop, and what I was saying is then, it's really, because your comprehensive plan's outdated at that point, you need to update it. If something happens in the next 5 or 10 years, you can rely on your documents that you completed to justify that. And what I would say, I think it would be great if what you guys described actually happens and this all comes together, but what I will say is, having worked with Business Oregon for a while, and having worked for the state, and having been employed for Jackson County, and dealing with SoReady and those folks, these kind of larger lot or larger footprint, medium footprint employers are few and far between. So if you guys are gearing this up for this to happen, that would be great. My experience is that SoReady and Business Oregon turn people away, during their recruitment when somebody, sends them something saying we're looking for 50 acres, and it's not in an abandoned mill site or something. They have to turn them away right now, but that doesn't happen that often when it gets to that kind of the more serious level where they're actually actively looking at a particular area. So if this pulls together, that would be great, but what I would say is I don't, if normal things were to happen, I wouldn't see any disadvantage probably to bring in 100 or 150 acres. That's still a lot of land that doesn't exist if you use it in larger lot increments. And if that were to develop, or you start to, get applications on that, and you want to justify trying to bring more in, then it would be a much simpler process than what you all have gone through already.
Does anybody know, I wonder just for reference, like 450 acres is really big. Does anybody know, for example, how big, I wish Mike was still here, but the parcel that Harry and David is on?
Which?
To give like a similar example, or
You mean they're in their Medford facility? That's what you're talking about? Oh.
Anybody know? No. It's a pretty big parcel of land, so I'm trying to get some perspective because we're looking at it on a map and it doesn't translate very well. But that's okay.
If you just go up North Phoenix, straight down Campbell Road, it's, go up the top of the hill there, look around. You kind of envision it.
Draw a little picture. No, I know exactly what it looks like.
We went up there together, checked
It's
it out.
big. I just mean in terms of, trying to envision what like an industrial complex would actually look like, or an employment complex would actually look like out there.
Anybody else?
This is for Mr. Mahar, Mr. Jones. I mean, how far away from a firm commitment from, all these different players you're talking about do you think you are?
How far away?
How far away from getting a firm commitment from these different players do you think you are?
Well, it's quite a ways away, but if we don't start talking now, they can't get it in their budget cycle to do it. But we're actively meeting.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, give us your name and just for the record.
Okay.
Come on in. Your name and address for the record.
I'm Mike Mahar. And we have the Arrowhead Ranch. I just want to say, first of all, I really believe that it's brilliant the way this was done in problem solving and where it's at. Josh, you've been part of that, and everything you said here, I don't disagree with. But I'm going to say you got to expand your thinking here, because this is a regional project. It's a regional project, and without the residential component, and without a developer that starts like we have and goes, and we are talking to people. I have a real heart for this. And when I say I do, I really do. I mean, I'm not a young man anymore, and I've got lots of projects. But what I like about this project is that I know it's good for the Greater Valley. This is, you have a real opportunity here as a city of Phoenix. We have 370 acres in your urban growth area that you have the ability to bring in. And I would really like to see something that was comprehensively done that would be right. Am I going to be able to see it all the way through? Probably not. But I agree with and I'm pushing. I would like to see a educational, like if you bring, if you create education, you create jobs, because industry follows education. And that's why when you ask the question, I'm having direct discussions with people because my heart's into it. This isn't I'm not thinking of big profits or anything. I'm thinking what's best for the community. And you guys have the opportunity to think big here, and I'm afraid if we think too small, it'll be small. If we think big and we follow with motion, I think we really have something. And I really emphasize that. I have to say, let's say we just bring 150 acres in, where's it going to be? Is it going to be the closest to the city?
Do whatever the city can justify.
Okay, well, let me just say this. Where I would start this development is clear on the north end, the furthest away from the city, because that's the most, first of all, you're going to bring your infrastructure across, which we have land on the other side with Harry and David, and we're the biggest part of that because it has to go through us. That's where your infrastructure is coming. On the part that you can actually develop, if you really look at the part that we have, the ranch, there's a lot of hillside. There's a lot of really not very good topography, and that's the closest to the city of Phoenix. My concern is, unless we get started in a meaningful way, it's not going to work. I mean, we've got to start on the north end. Is there any doubt about that? No. So how do we do that? Zero doubt. There's no doubt that that's where it has to start. That's where we're talking to OIT. That's where we're talking to Asante. And there's genuine interest. Do we have anything? I mean, we don't even know if we can bring that part in. That's why I'm sitting here and saying, I really think that if we can, if we can think big, it's going to happen. I've watched it bend, and I've watched them think big, and things happen over there. I've always felt, and most of the things I do are in Medford, but I've always felt that we haven't thought big enough here. This is a location like we've never had before. This whole thing started on our 60 acres. We came up with the idea that would be a good employment area. Harry and David liked the idea. Gary Hall at the time was carrying the message here in Phoenix, and I think Gary was very smart in following up on. And the truth of the matter is, we've never had a good place to put employment. You have to get on Highway 62 and drive to White City. We've been fragmented my whole life here. I've grown up here. This is close to Ashland. You can put South Stage across. You're gonna pull West Medford in. You're gonna pull Jacksonville in. This is in the heart of it all, and it's in your town. So I just want you to think big, because we have a heart to do something here.
Mike, maybe you can have some more meetings with your, Asante, Providence, OIT, bring Josh in. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's a dream, but it's a dream that I think is doable. And if you don't dream it and you don't go there, I mean, I think that is where I would see this starting, because it is medical. Medical is our future. And so, anyway, I appreciate you letting me talk. I wasn't planning on saying anything. I just wanted to sit here and listen, but I think I'm coming from the heart right now.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're at an hour and 45 minutes. I think it was a pretty useful evening, but I just wanted to see if anybody else wants to add anything before we...
Does anybody want to talk about this, or I feel like we didn't talk about this at all, which I thought this was what the meeting was about, but, so I'm a little confused because it felt like we went really, really big
Yeah,
picture.
but we're on the horn to see if anybody wanted to comment on that, and I didn't get any takers, but
Okay.
we can spend some more time talking about the economic element if anybody has any questions for Evan.
So did this get combined? Is there still a local and a regional economic element, or,
Yes.
okay, so
Well,
this one's a local.
Okay. There is there are two studies, local and regional. There is a single element.
Oh, okay, thank you, that's helpful.
So, if I may, it sounds like we have a little bit of new information that we didn't have previously. I'm not sure exactly how it would affect the economic element directly, because it doesn't change the background information, which is also an excellent reminder to all of us that this is not our UGB expansion. It is only one component of it. We still have land use to do. And if we do in fact have partners who are willing to essentially provide amicus briefs to our future work, especially the land use element, where they can say, look, now you've got this housing and you've got this economic, we're going to fold it into the land use element and say, and we've got people in the development community saying, you have underestimated demand here. You need to ask for more land when the time comes, which hopefully will be very soon. We may well gain the favor of the state. If we have letters of support or commitment from those regional partners stating that we would like to expand, we don't have anywhere to do it, and we do not think that the numbers shown in your economic element are sufficient to meet even our needs. That could help us greatly and may not get us 100% of PH5 all at once, at least for the employment portion, but might get us pretty darn close. And along with that, if we are bringing in more employment land, then absolutely we should be able to show a need for residential. And they will go together. And I think if I were to condense this, it would be, this is the reason why I came here. We're building a town. And we have an opportunity to see what other people have done that has succeeded and what they've done that has failed.
This is your canvas, Evan.
It is. It's not mine, it's ours. I only serve the will of you, so it's your canvas, and I'm the one that helps you implement it. And so we have an opportunity to do something really cool, and we also, in a rather odd way, because we are fiscally constrained, have a really darn good reason to do some things that are both innovative and cost-effective and actually add to quality of life. And one of those is the jobs, housing, balance, and the transportation that connects them. They are all part of the same puzzle. And if we can have an integrated transportation system that reduces the need for individual motor vehicles, and that means, buses, segways, skateboards, bicycles, I don't know, stuff we don't have yet, scooters. But anything we can do to have basically a large concentration of people that can access home, work, jobs, fun, without needing to put a car over our interchanges, whoopee-doo, we've done something super cool, and we've saved a whole lot of money in the process, and we've made a place that's desirable to live.
That was the whole theory behind the conceptual plan. You have your workforce right next to where they're going to work.
Yep, and all those people will be coming to downtown Phoenix, maybe on foot or on bike or on scooter or whatever, spending money and supporting local businesses.
And let me ask you and Aaron a question. You know, I think we're supposed to look at the element at the next city council meeting. Given the information that we had tonight, is it better to put it off a couple weeks? Is it a time-sensitive issue? Would it make sense?
So I would leave that choice to the council. The only thing to bear in mind, of course, is the fact that I will not be in the office basically the entire month of September.
Got it.
So it's not a couple of weeks.
So
Yep.
I would certainly suggest we hold the meetings as scheduled.
Okay.
Now, if continuances are warranted, then they're warranted and we'll do it and we'll get it right. And if that means we have to wait a little extra time to get it done, but it is a process, we will need to discuss it more. We will be bringing something back that is not what you have in front of you today. And we have new information that we may be able to integrate into that as we move forward. And if not into this, into the land use element, because they are complementary. The economic and the residential are complementary. And if we have developers that are basically saying, you bet, we want to do both, we see the demand, and we have willing sellers and willing builders, awesome.
What's the other element? There's the land and urbanization.
Well, we're going to have to do a minor update to the housing element to account for the change in the population projections. But beyond that, we'll need to do land use, and then urbanization is what will basically, it's the culmination, if you will, of this effort that says, oh my gosh, we're short 400 acres, we need it right now. Now we go to the state and we apply. I mean, that's a very simplified version. I'm sure Josh would agree. But yeah, so there is more work to do, which also means that there is the opportunity to account for what we've heard tonight in our further work, in a very good way.
Well, I appreciate everyone's attention. Hope you found that useful tonight. A lot of good information, I thought. Anybody else want to add anything for the good of the order? All right.
I want to say one thing real quick.
Sure.
Just wanted to say, I appreciate you two guys coming, and Josh, you as well, and that I love your dream. I think it's something that I can totally get behind and help make happen. But I think we need to get things, I mean, from my perspective, get things moving along a little further so we have a little more firm commitment so that we can really truly get behind that and try to make this come in a bigger chunk.
We'll do it.
But yeah, we need that to come along if we can.
Okay, with that said, let's go